Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Greg Ciotti with us. Greg, thanks for coming on the program.
Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So Greg, you currently do marketing and advertising at Help Scout, but I wanted to have you on the show because you kind of have a unique way that you approach it. You kind of approach it through the disciplines of psychology and content marketing. Does that sound about right?
That is about right. I know. It's a strange mix at first glance, but they definitely play well together.
Well, you're going to tell us a lot about how they play well together today, so that's good. Let's start with kind of the high level, psychology itself, right? We use the word a lot, but how do you define psychology? And then why do you think it's important for a marketer to really get their mind around psychology?
Right. So behavioral psychology, when it comes to marketing, the most important thing is it just shows you how people tick. That's kind of like my way of framing it. And it's important. I mean, this is kind of my running joke with why I believe human behavior is so important, is that, if you were selling to anything but people, dog advertisements would be nothing but a tennis ball and a squirrel running in the backyard. You know what I mean? For frisky bits or whatever they're trying to sell you. But you're not. You're always selling to people. That's why the commercials, like I said, the dog food commercials will be about keeping your dog healthy, blah, blah, blah. You kind of have to know what people want to hear. It's a lot easier to cater to desires that already are existing than to try to create desires. Okay. So for me, that's why psychology is so important, because there's a lot of things that are already kind of within us, desires and things like that you can understand when you kind of look into the research behind it.
No, I like the way you kind of laid it out there. You're not creating a need, you're fulfilling a need.
Exactly.
And yeah, I mean, as soon as you say that, it instantly just makes sense. Oh yeah, that's a much better route for a marketer to take. Because to create a need, you don't have enough money to create a need.
Right.
It would take so much, to do that. So let me ask you this also. When we think about psychology, I think about just degrees in psychology. I think about psychologists. I think about really having to learn a lot of things that might be dry or boring or whatever. Is it possible to understand psychology just through kind of having a keen awareness of your surroundings, by looking into human nature, by paying attention, or do you really have to go into the more technical side of things and really explicitly study it? Well, what do you think?
It's definitely a mix, because I don't ever want to knock intuition and innate ability to kind of understand how people might perceive things. Because you can't always cite a study on why this is or that is. I mean, it's an ongoing thing, obviously. It's an ongoing school of thought. So I would say that in certain instances, you can take some psychological takeaways from other sources. Maybe one of my favorite ways to do this is looking at heat maps of the sites that I'm working with. And you can kind of dig into later the psychological aspect of why are people avoiding the images on my sidebar, right? Or why are people always focused on this side of the site? Or why are people looking this way? And why, you know what I mean? So you can kind of take data like that and then try to find the psychological reasoning behind it. I will say that I feel like it is important to know some of the research because it gives you a look at how the study was conducted. I'm not going to knock anybody, but sometimes I feel like people will stretch the implications of a study a little bit too far.
Okay.
Sometimes when I'm taking research and I'm applying it to online marketing, you have to make a little bit of a logical leap. But I feel like anything that I use, it's always backed by the results that I've seen. I wouldn't talk about it otherwise. But sometimes you'll see people talk about psychology, even in the more academic publications, and they're really stretching the implications of a new study, and you kind of have to look at that stuff just a little bit so you can be oh, this is reliable because look at, this study's been around forever and people kind of guarantee this is for real.
Yeah.
Or when you look at new stuff, they can be totally can be a total whack job really, and it wasn't peer reviewed and blah blah blah. So there's definitely a balance. You can take insights that you've seen from other sources and look at the psychology behind it, but I feel like you also need to look at research just a little bit too to guarantee that you're looking at the right stuff.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. I mean, you want to make informed decisions, not just decisions off of headlines that were link baited that you read on Twitter or something. That's not enough about the study to really dig in and understand it.
Exactly.
So you mentioned needing to understand some of these studies, dig into them. Where do people go to do that? Because as soon as you say that, I'm thinking, all right, that's not something I'm used to studying. It's not something I'm used to kind of going out and uncovering. What are some sources to learn maybe where the studies are or any other kind of actionable psychological things that I can learn? What do you use?
So the number one resource, books. The reason I say books is that the internet hasn't gotten around to covering it as much. Books have been that's kind of a weird divide, and one of the reasons I also talk about it like on my own blog and stuff like that is that books have been around with this stuff forever. Like Cialdini's research and stuff like that. Like people have loved that kind of stuff forever in books. And also books are always made for a larger audience, so they're not going to be like, he's not going to cite things that you need to go up and look later to figure out what he meant. You know what I mean? He's going to explain to you in layman's terms like what it is, the author, I mean. So starting with books is great. And also books serve as what I call like rabbit hole reads. Essentially, you kind of fall into the rabbit hole where like this person in this book says that. So you're like, yeah, now you have all these other books to check out. Or maybe they'll not link to, but kind of like put a research link in the book at the end. Psychology books have a habit of doing that, so you can go into the back of the book and like say, oh, well, let me check out this research real quick. Even if you can just read the abstract, which will give you a gist of like what it was about. So books are the best way to start because they're easy to read. You're essentially, it's almost like you're cheating. You're like getting you're getting 3 years maybe of somebody's research.
Yeah.
And you can read it in 2 hours. Like
I feel the exact same way.
Yeah, what better way can you learn from that? I mean, you're almost like you're hacking reading or something. Like you're hacking learning by
hacking life
like,
itself.
So books are great, and like I said, I dig into the studies like probably way more often than most people, just because I like to see how is this conducted, blah blah blah. But usually, books are a solid way to start, and books are always tend to be very reliable. I have to say tend now because I don't know if you hold about the whole scandal with How We Think and all that kind of, or How We Decide, that book. It was
I don't
yeah.
know
Well, I won't get into it, but they found like a lot of the research was just flat out wrong and stuff like that, misquotations. But books are 99% of the time, very reliable, great reads, and anyone can dig into them.
Yeah. Well, name off just a couple of the ones that really influence you. What are some of the books, or maybe some of the authors that have written multiple books that we can just go and quickly look up on Amazon and maybe grab a few of them?
Yeah. So on my site, actually, I have a full list of 50.
Perfect.
Yes, but I can throw you the link. It's sparringmind.com/psychology-books.
Okay.
But some of my favorites to get started. The Social Animal is probably the best, like social psychology, like 101. Like that's probably the best starting book. Unfortunately, that one's kind of hard to get your hands on, but that one's a great one. Cialdini, Influence. Everyone needs to read that. I shouldn't even have to explain. Everyone go buy that book right now. I really like Ariely's work too. A lot of the stuff that he looks into, it's more psychology on a personal level, but through those personal insights, you get to see how people react to things. And that definitely has marketing implications because you're seeing how people are like internally evaluating certain situations. So I would say those recommendations right there are like the best beginner roundup.
No, that's exactly what I'm looking for. It's kind of the best entry point. And I even like that you mentioned books instead of just other websites because, the crowd that's watching this, startups, entrepreneurs, they're used to just everything being online, and they don't realize that like sometimes offline things matter.
I have a bookshelf with real books.
Yeah, same here.
How dare I, right?
It's crazy, right? Now, you also published an ebook. So you're an author yourself, and you published an ebook titled 10 Ways to Convert More Customers Using Psychology. And first, tell us where we can go get that book and how we can get our hands on it. But then I want you to kind of walk us through those 10 steps. So first, where can they go and find that?
Sure. So on helpscout.net, it's under the resources section, I believe, because I argued for this, but I believe it's like the very top one, like above the fold.
I think it is. I was looking yesterday. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it is. And you have a lot of other things on there too. Are those almost all your creations or some of them?
The 75 stats ebook was something they put together. And I love that one because it has a lot of great customer service statistics. And the 25 ways to thank your customer, that was also a pre-Gregory Ciotti Help Scout effort, right?
But the rest of it was kind of, you were a part of the rest of it?
Right.
Yeah, and there's quite a bit of resources on there. I just found out about those yesterday when I was kind of preparing for this. And there was a number of things I saw on that page. I'm like, all right, I need to circle back to this when I get time. Cause I
gotta say, I don't have the exact number with me at off the top of my head, but in terms of our newsletter leads, email leads, like content emails, not customers. That page is like I would take a guess at like maybe 70% of people come through that page.
Wow.
So like we have the newsletter bar or newsletter sign up in our blog and stuff like that. But that page is like the killer conversion page for email signups, just for startups looking to.
It makes sense, and I want to get into content a lot in a little bit because when I saw that page, I was like, these guys are doing content right. I mean, I was very drawn to it, and I have a very high filter for those kind of things. I know how content is made. I know how it can be thrown together without care. Like I know how this world works. And yet, I really am going to circle back to that resource page. So we'll talk about it in a minute, though. So 10 ways to convert more customers using psychology. The first one, you talk about action paralysis. Explain that to us a little bit.
So action paralysis, it was actually a very interesting study that the American Cancer Society did. And they found that when they weren't setting a minimum or kind of like establishing a minimum when they asked customers for donations, that people would donate less. So one of the things that they added, I believe this is verbatim, but even a few pennies will help, is what they said. So action paralysis is kind of when they don't know like what's appropriate to start with or acceptable to start with, they don't want to take action. So for the American Cancer Society, it's way obvious because it's like people are like, they're maybe concerned with donating too little. Like they'll say, oh, I'll donate $5, and they're afraid of being judged by the person accepting the donations who possibly had just seen a bunch of people donate $20, so they feel self-conscious, right? So when they establish the even a few pennies will help, it's like, oh, well, I can donate anything that I want. And what they found for people, I know there's people out there that are like, yeah, well, what about this? They actually found that the average donations were higher when they established that minimum. So you might expect that even a few pennies will help. People are literally like, okay, here's the change.
I got $5. Here you go.
Yeah, exactly. Here's the change in my pocket. No, people, once they felt comfortable, like I can donate anything, you actually saw the averages increase. So for like marketing, it's really about establishing minimums, parameters that people can operate in, so they're not like, ooh, I don't know, is what I'm doing right or wrong? You know what I mean?
Well, let me ask you a follow-up with that. If you're leading a startup that has kind of a donation component, the takeaway is clearly obvious.
Right.
A lot of the startups, they don't really have a donation component. Is there a way to apply this that you can think of off the top of your head? I'm kind of putting you on the spot here.
No, yeah, that's fine. I mean, one of the best ways that I like kind of apply this is when people are just getting started with signing up. Like, it's nice to let them know exactly what it's going to take. So some people are kind of hesitant to take action because it's like, well, how much will I have to do? Or should I be doing these things when I'm signing? So you kind of establish the minimum parameters. Like, it's only going to take 5 minutes. You don't need a credit card. Like, you almost list those things outright, even though it may not be a concern to you. For other people, when they see the minimum action that it takes, they're more likely to take it.
Okay, that helps me because you took it away from money and you applied it to other things. Because with startups, a lot of times, like, the money is non-negotiable. Right. There is no, you get to have input on what you're giving.
Right.
And so applying it to other things now makes a lot more sense.
Right.
The next thing you talk about is labels. Explain labels to us.
So this one was really interesting. So what they did was they conducted a study on how active people would be politically, like how likely they were to vote. And they took two groups of people. They randomly told them, they didn't look at their past political history. They randomly told them, you're more politically active. And then other people, they were just like, you're average in political activity. They found that the people who they told were more politically active, despite the fact that it wasn't necessarily true, where I think it was like a 16 to 70% higher turnout for that group. So just by telling people you're politically active, they kind of like, they
aspire to it and they become
it. Yeah. So like the takeaway really is that like when you label customers with a positive attribute that they because being politically active, voting, that's something that most of us would say is a good trait to have.
Yeah.
So when you're labeling people with good traits, they naturally will they will actually take the action to fulfill the prophecy of being that kind of person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's good. I'm thinking about, Growth Hacker TV, and I'm like, all right, I need to label the people watching this as, you're the ones trying to change the world. You're the ones trying to build startups. You're a part of this, select group that's really moving things forward. And then they start buying into that. They start believing it. And it's, it's kind of self-fulfilling. That makes a lot of sense. And that's true with, you could label things in a million different ways.
Definitely.
And that's why, stereotypes are so powerful, negative and positive, because there's no power to words. And we don't really get that sometimes until we dig into the psychology. Like, the words, the labels, like, they actually do things in reality, not just within our own minds. The next thing you talked about was the 3 types of buyers. I like this one quite a bit. Tell me about the 3 types of buyers.
Yeah, this one is interesting because, a lot of people, one of the things that I hear when I'm talking about a piece of research is that my customers aren't like that. So this one is kind of a great study to show you that, yes, people are very different, but there's also some underlying things that kind of tend to apply to almost everyone. So George Lowenstein did research on buying pain. Essentially, what pain do you feel when you buy something? Like almost like, ooh, $1,000, like ooh, like kind of like the cringe of I've spent too much money. So he found that universally people are essentially filtered into three groups. Spendthrifts are people who they have higher levels of buying pain. It takes more to get them to that point. Unconflicted people, which is kind of like the average buying pain, just your average shopper, really. And tightwads, me, no, people with lower buying pain. They tend to try to it takes a little more persuasion to get them to kind of like take action. So some of the differences, just to give you an example, when you're selling to spendthrifts, hedonistic tendencies tend to take precedence over utility. So if you're selling, I think one of the examples he used was selling a back massage. It works better when you're selling to spendthrifts when you present it as like a relief, a nice kind of just treat to yourself. It works better for tightwads when you're saying it's for back pain. It's gonna, your back's gonna be. It's gonna thank you.
A hard reason to spend the money.
Yeah,
they need
it's like
a
healthy thing. Yeah. And also for tightwads. So spendthrifts, like they love signing up for things with credit cards. For tightwads, they prefer things like bundling because they don't like making multiple purchases because each purchase is like another pain. So they're actually more likely to, maybe buy, like if you're going to try to get a tightwad to buy a luxury version of a car or something, you're actually better off doing the whole bundle than trying to sell them a car and then get them to get leather seats and navigation. You know what I mean? Because each thing is like, like it's a pain every time they buy it. So, and they need value to be reframed like very concisely. Like you can never sell a tightwad on something that's like, oh, it's only $1,000 a year. They need to hear the monthly breakdown, maybe even the weekly breakdown, because they can be like, I'm getting this much value, and they can kind of evaluate it that way.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And so, a start of watching this, maybe the takeaway isn't find how to market to all three kinds of people. It's understand who is your audience, because your audience probably fits in one of those three probably nicely. And now change your copywriting, change your imagery, change your marketing approach to kind of fit what that buyer needs to hear. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. If you find that you're not only selling to one or the other, try to find who's the majority. Really, is the most important thing. Who's the majority, and kind of cater your main pieces of copy towards them.
Yeah, because you're gonna have mixed messages if you try to chase them all. It seems like, and then you're gonna turn off the one and the other. Another thing you mentioned is to admit shortcomings. Explain that to us a little bit.
Yeah, so this one's interesting. I mean, we all make mistakes, and what they found was that for the companies, a lot of companies don't seem to live up to this, but they found that the companies who admitted to mistakes they made during like a downturn, essentially in revenue, customers and investors, they had more favorable opinions of those companies. And the reason being, this is what the psychologist this was her conclusion, was that when you are assigning blame to external causes, even if they're true, it makes you seem like you're out of control of the situation, right? Yeah. So you could say that, like, you had some sort of shipping problem and it really was out of your control. But people look at that as like, well, they don't, they don't have a grasp on this situation. But if you mess up and you say, you're owning the situation, you're owning the mistake, it gave people a sense that, you can take steps to actually fix it because you are in control. You have your handles kind of like on the reins. Yeah. And they found that this was like conducted with both fake companies and real companies. And they found that like, investor opinions and money invested and all these other big like real life things that apply to your company, they were all improved when the company owned up to their mistakes instead of trying to skirt around it. And you'll see that with a lot of PR disasters. It's usually when a company tries to they try to skirt around the mistake that they made. So just something to keep in mind in case it happens.
Yeah, and it makes sense because it's the kind of behavior we expect out of our fellow humans. We expect people to own up to things, and then we can move forward from there. And in corporations, in a sense, they feel like they can operate in ways sometimes that we wouldn't expect a friend to operate in. And then, they're negatively impacted and they wonder why. It's like transparency, communication, honesty. Definitely. They matter at any level of society, no matter how small or how big you go. It's baked into the fabric of our life. I mean, it matters. So it makes sense that that's, what the study would show. But it's still cool to have the research and to see that. Right. Another one is to use urgency the smart way. So what is the smart way and what's the dumb way?
So urgency, you'll see urgency all over the web in terms of landing pages and all types of copy. But what they found in this one study I thought was really interesting. So it was essentially a test of copy in a pamphlet. Who does those anymore?
Yeah.
But it was a test of copy done in a pamphlet, and it described tetanus, like how tetanus disease affects you and blah, blah, blah. It's pretty awful stuff. I honestly, like, nowadays it's less of concern, but it's pretty terrible stuff. So they found that when they were handing these pamphlets out to people, they wanted to see how many people followed up to get their tetanus shot, right, or like a tetanus vaccination. And they noticed that there was two different types of pamphlets. One just had that information, like, oh, it's terrible, it's awful. And the second one had very, very, very minimal follow-up information. Literally just maybe like an address or just like a one line of instruction of like what to do. Call this number or something like that. And they found that it was like, I think it was like 25% more people got vaccinated with the second pamphlet. So literally the call to urgency, the lead researcher's conclusion was that people can block out urgency without instruction. Essentially, when you create this like big sense of like you're kind of pumping people up, if they don't have a very simple instruction of what to do next, they're just going to be like, well, that's not going to happen to me anyway, right?
Gotcha.
So you build up this kind of fear of tetanus, and then people are like, well, it's not likely, so they block it out. But if they have a very simple thing of what to do next, they have no excuse really. So I see a lot of people making this mistake where they kind of build up too much hype, and then it's like you're confused about what exactly to do next. Like you need to spell it out, like as obvious as you can make it. It may seem goofy when you're actually typing that kind of copy out, like click here right now, or you know what I mean? But it's important to kind of create that obviousness with people because they need it when you've kind of built up the anticipation like that.
Yeah, I like that word obvious. I mean, online things can become so complicated, bloated, hard to maneuver. I mean, that's why the UX is becoming so important, with this new crop of startups. It's because things just aren't obvious, and so make them obvious, and then the urgency doesn't go to waste that you've built up in the consumer. Talk to us about the word instantly. There's another thing you have kind of built around that word.
Yeah, so instantly, I hate that these words have this kind of power because I call them the Sunday words. There's like cheesy local campaigns of like new flashes up in like big yellow print. But instantly is one of those words that works. So, research around delayed gratification and stuff like that, they found that like when you use words that let people envision the problem getting solved quickly, it kind of breaks down their barriers to like rationalizing themselves out of a purchase. Obviously, you want to be selling great stuff that actually is useful, but I'm saying, this kind of stuff matters when people are evaluating whether or not to buy. When they can see that they'll get it either on the internet instantly, or if it's a physical object quickly, they can envision the pain being solved. Like and I'm saying pain, but it could be just like the pain of I need a nice camera because I want to take quality picture. You know what I mean? Like just adding the fact that they can get it quickly, it makes them more likely to take action for sure.
No, I totally believe that because I would spend so much money on Amazon if I knew same-day delivery was really cheap. If there was some way to make that happen, there's so many books I want to buy that I just don't because I'm like, a couple days, like I'll just find a blog to read now to try to get this information.
I want to read it in a couple days.
It's like I want it right now so bad that I would spend 500% more if it was instantly baked into it. So
and you'll notice Amazon is really trying to step up the delivery stuff with Prime and just in general. They're really trying to make delivery like super fast because it's so important.
I think they get that delayed gratification. Like it's not real. It's not real gratification when it's delayed. Even though we're rational human beings, we know in a couple days it's going to feel great to get the book in the mail. But it's just something about it. Like it's delayed. So that's great. You also talk about making an enemy. What do you mean by that?
Ooh, this is my favorite one.
Okay.
This is my favorite one. So I actually know the title of this one off the top because I love the study so much. Social categorization and intergroup behavior. Taj Affel, I believe, was the researcher on this. And essentially what he found was that when you divide people with arbitrary differences, like I think one of the examples was like he had people pick between one painter or another. Like literally the goofiest, like you don't know the painter, like you're just picking one guy or the other. He found that when you kind of created this division with these meaningless distinctions, people would still when it came time to dole out rewards, like he would give individuals rewards, and you would dole it out to anyone that you wanted, money, something like that. They would actively reward in-group people and discriminate against like people outside of the group over the goofiest distinctions. Now, one of the like more funny. This is not really like a follow-up study, but I kind of see it as like related.
Mm-hmm.
They found that when people use language when talking about sports, when the team won, they were more likely to say "we won." When the team lost,
they lost.
They lost. So people love being a part of these groups that really, I hate to call sports groups meaningless because, fans getting together, and I hang out with all my Eagles fans and stuff like that when we watch the games. But really, they're meaningless. And people, they love being part of the winning team and rewarding their team, even when the teams are divided, but essentially with nonsense. So.
Yeah. Is there a way to kind of apply this to startups in any way? Or because I'm having a hard time trying to figure out how to do this. I mean, so what do you think?
No, see, the thing is that most companies can't make an enemy like Apple made an enemy. So Apple actively targeted, PCs are boring. Like if you look at all their old commercials, right? It's like I think one of them was like a blonde girl in like a tank top, like smashing like the corporate like PC. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's this old like 1985 commercial or something that's like. Most people can't do that. That's too risky for most companies. So what you want to do is you want to make an enemy with a belief. So Copyblogger is a site that helps Scout. We love Copyblogger in terms of content marketing. They go after digital sharecropping, which is the idea of you're spending all this time creating content and you're putting it on someone else's website. Like, what sense does that make? I mean, like, your own website, start your own blog. For us, for Help Scout, we're not like taking pot shots at desk or something like that. We're looking at people who view customer service as an expense and not as as like an insanely good way to make loyalty as a marketing tactic, literally to create customers, and it's like a marketing tactic. So we kind of attack that, the idea that customer service is just an expense. We don't like that idea. We're constantly shooting it down. We're not shooting down individuals or companies or being jerks about it.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff is really, really important because you create division where you want it. Like, we want to ostracize people who believe that customer service is just an expense. We don't want you to be a part of our group, right? So that kind of stuff is very important to kind of establish in terms of branding and like content and all that stuff.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And it seems like it kind of leads into the next one, which is to stand for something. Yes. It seems like this is the other side of the coin of make an enemy stand for something. So what do you mean by stand for something?
So they found, I believe, it was Harvard Business Review published this. They found that for people who were like fiercely loyal to a brand, 64% of them cited shared values. So Help Scout, the example was obvious, right? It's you create division in both ostracizing people and who are the superstar, like who are the people who are all about what you're about. And for us, it's people who take care of their customers like crazy, right? But another great example is Tom Shoes. So they obviously have the whole thing where you buy a pair of shoes and they send a pair of shoes, to people in need and things like that. And that created a really strong community about people who felt, they love Tom Shoes because of doing that. I mean, it's a quality product that's like square one, but also Tom Shoes like kind of differentiated themselves from, or they almost took the opposite route of like, the kind of bad labor conditions that you might sometimes associate with a shoe company. And they kind of took it to where like, we want to reward people for buying our shoes, and people they got behind that 100%. So.
Yeah. It seems like the more human, again, that a company becomes, the more that humans can relate to them and actually buy into what they're doing. Earlier you talked about admitting shortcomings. That's a very human trait, not a corporate trait. Now you're talking about standing for something, having values. That's a very human trait, not a corporate trait per se.
It's nice when marketing and beliefs, like, and good beliefs align together, right? Marketing doesn't always have to be like sleazy.
That's why I like where this is going, because I believe this personally, and so it's an added benefit that the data backs it up. So that's great. You also talk about the devil's advocate. What do you mean with that point?
That's interesting. The devil's advocate. So the devil's advocate term actually started in the Catholic Church. They would assign someone to be devil's advocate when someone else was becoming a cardinal, I believe. Or no, it was sainthood, when they were being inducted into sainthood. This person's job was to kind of find out all the bad facts about them and try to make the case against them to kind of create a sense of balance. What they found, the Catholic Church has since gotten rid of this practice, but what they found in research is that devil's advocate actually enhances the persuasive efforts of the original argument, like 99% of the time. Right. And the reason being...
Unpack that for me,
the reason being is like, when you're bringing up the typical objections, most of the time they get addressed right away. I wish I knew more about this study off the top of my head, but one of the great ones was this big era with NASA, where people were like, they kept trying to bring up these objections, but people kept like brushing them aside. I wish I had that off the top of my head. But essentially, when you bring up objections with a group, when you're playing the devil's advocate, you're not objecting outright. You're just kind of like, well, what about this? Most people will address it right away in terms of like, no, we have that handled. And then now the original argument is actually enhanced because it's like, oh no, we've taken care of those outside things. When really the person who, brought up the objection didn't do so in an outright objection kind of way. Like they're not saying this is wrong. They're kind of saying, well, what if? You know what I mean? So what ifs really actually they enhance the persuasive argument that you put forward in the beginning. And so for marketing stuff, I always apply this to like, what kind of objections will people bring up as soon as they hit this point in the video or as soon as they hit this point in the copy, and then you literally address it, and it's almost like mind reading. Like if you got to a point about price and they're like, well, what if I have concerns? And then you're like, boom, you hit them with the line about, that you knew that they were going to think about. So, and it works, the other way too, in case you ever have to do this. I haven't really come across a marketing example where this is relevant, but if you have to make a point the other way around, you should object outright. Don't play devil's advocate. Literally become, the voice of kind of like dissonance against the idea. So
yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And then the last one, these have been great, you walking us through these. The last one is keep them on their toes. What does that mean?
So yeah, we're at Help Scout. We love the idea about reciprocity. Essentially, that when you do things for others, it comes back to you, and that's backed by research too. That's not karma or anything. That's not like a spiritual belief or anything like that. So they found that reciprocity, it doesn't take a lot usually to get the situation started. Cialdini actually, I think he did a study where it was like a can of soda let people evaluate another person like more highly just because they bought them a can of soda. So another great study though, and that's where this comes in, is that surprise reciprocity is the best of all. So if you do something for a person and it's out of the blue, like they don't expect it, like you really win people over. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to the kind of small things where that can occur, like maybe a handwritten note from someone that just came out of the blue. You're like, oh, whoa. Like it's like a handwritten note on a piece of paper, but it's like the most meaningful part of your day all of a sudden, right?
Totally.
Business application, Zappos did this amazingly. They upgrade you randomly for free shipping. I know the first time I ordered from Zappos, it was like 3 days. I was like, okay, it's acceptable for a pair of shoes. And then I got it like the next morning. I was like, whoa, I won't be from anywhere else like ever again.
Exactly.
So that sort of like surprise reciprocity, surprising people with a bonus, it works amazingly well.
Yeah, we recently bought some kitchen knives for our house from fab.com, and then they show up with like posters and other stuff in there. We're like, oh, we got cool posters. Right. It's like, I'm a grown man. Why do I need a poster? And yet it was exciting, and I like them more now.
How are people winning me over with bonus stickers? They did, but why?
I want a bonus sticker. Somebody send me some, It's like, and yet think about it, like, we shouldn't care, and yet it's like a can of Coke. It doesn't matter, and yet it matters, And so, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So you've been marketing with Help Scout, helping them with their, campaigns and stuff. Give us some examples of maybe how you've used psychology to market Help Scout, how you've kind of maybe put some of these things into play and some of the things that you've done, just to give us even a more concrete example of how, not that it could work, but that it does work,
Right. I actually have a really great example because it's so recent. So there was a study I was reading called Why and How Controversy Causes Conversation. Okay, it's a Wharton paper. And it was essentially evaluating how, like, what sort of controversies really get people talking. And they found that almost like paradoxically, almost like the reverse of what you would expect, things of high controversy they wouldn't get talked about as much on like social media and casual forms of kind of a conversation. Like most people wouldn't talk about these things in a public arena because, I think the reason is obvious, because it's so like risky to you don't want to talk about a recent tragedy with a business person or a coworker. You don't want to talk about religion or politics. All the things that your mom told you to stay away from the dinner table when you're at a friend's house, right? Like you don't want to bring those things up. But also, like, high controversy can also be calling people out, which I see a lot of, like, bloggers do, especially tech people. There was a big tech controversy, like, this week, I think, about some sort of, like, goofy. Anyway, for a business blog, you want to stay away from that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So what this study kind of shows is that items of low controversy can still cause tons of conversation.
Okay.
I call this the toilet paper strategy.
All right.
Well, the reason I call it that is that if you type in toilet paper orientation into Google, there is a 7,000 word Wikipedia article on toilet paper orientation. Essentially, should the roll be coming out from the top or the bottom, right? It gets better.
Well, obviously the top, if you want to argue about it.
Right? At the very top of this article, they have a quote from an advice columnist she has been published for like 50 years. Mm-hmm. And she said that the most controversial article she's ever written was on toilet paper orientation.
That's awesome.
Like what side of the, I know. This is a person, like an advice columnist writes about the craziest stuff sometimes. Mm-hmm. And she's telling you that toilet paper orientation was her most controversial article.
Yeah.
There was also an insanely viral image on both Facebook and just the web at large, where it was literally just a picture of the two like ways that you could put toilet paper on your dispenser. And one of them said, this is right, and the other said, this is wrong. Uh-huh. Like 500,000 likes, like 100,000 shares on Facebook alone. Like the image was like crazy on the web at large.
Yeah.
But the takeaway from this, it relates very closely to the study, is that things that divide people in very even groups, that's an important part. Because I imagine that, even though one side of the argument probably has more people than the other, it's fairly evenly split. People are like, yeah, the bottom, yeah, the top. You know what I mean? If it's one-sided, there's no controversy. But things that are very, they're easy to discuss, but people still, for some reason, have like a very passionate opinion on, those are the greatest things that you can talk about to stir up controversy. Now, how did I apply it? Mm-hmm. So a recent article I wrote was Why Steve Jobs Never Listened to His Customers. So essentially the divide that I created there is customer feedback and innovation, or sheltered innovation, kind of like Steve Jobs, Apple's approach. Sure. We don't let, Steve Jobs quote about people don't know what they want until you show it to them, blah, blah, blah. I thought that was a great example. I'm kind of calling my own example great, but I thought that was a great example because people are very opinionated on that matter. Mm-hmm. People are very opinionated on, yes, customers know what they want. We listen to them closely, and that's been our, it's a huge part of our innovation. Mm-hmm. And other people are like, no, I have to innovate because I'm in an industry where I can't copy other people. I can't listen to customers because they're just going to tell me things that are already out there. Yeah. And it's a great argument. Like, I have a hard time really picking a side, 100% conclusively. But for the article, I picked a side because you need to plant your flag when you do this stuff. Yeah. So we wrote about this. This is like a toilet paper argument, a toilet paper controversy, where it's like, yes, people are going to have passionate opinions. We had comments that were like, like a quarter as long as the article was, like people's opinions. Yeah. It hit the front page of Hacker News. Yeah. It was like 10,000 visitors over like 40 hours or something like that. Uh-huh. So creating that controversy that was like, no one's going to get truly offended. I'm not really going to hurt anyone's feelings. Yeah. But I am creating a divide on a topic that people love to argue about on the internet. So that strategy is one that's worked really well, and I just did it recently. So that's kind of where I took a study and applied it to content.
That is such a helpful insight for so many reasons. Earlier you talked about sporting teams. Like, they really don't matter, but you pick a side. You're on the Eagles. You watch them. You cheer for them. It's like, in a sense, you're creating your own NFL. You're creating your own NBA. Like, you get to create these arbitrary teams that really don't matter and then watch them fight each other. And we all enjoy it because nothing's really at stake at the end of the day. I've never thought about it like that, but that's such a good idea, though. So thank you for that. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about is content strategies, and really kind of content strategies in general. We've talked about, your specific strategies, the ebook you wrote, you walked us through that. But you just do well understanding content kind of at a high level. Why are content strategies so effective? Because, time after time, I've been surprised by how many people come on the show and utilize a content strategy, and I didn't expect them to. Why are they so effective?
So content marketing in general and having a good content strategy that relates to the people who are likely to buy your product, it's really just know, like, trust is, the phrase that I like to relate it to. It's people, they come, they see valuable content, they read it, they literally have a takeaway. They'll apply it to their business. And if you didn't catch them on the first article, at least now you're in their brain. Like, I read this great article on Help Scout. I haven't signed up yet, but it showed me a great way to increase retention or loyalty, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Pretty much every software that I use now in my marketing stuff, almost all of them I found from an article originally.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, I love this split test that you guys did and all the data you showed me. And now I'm going to sign up for your software because it looks like your software provides what I wanted to do and what you kind of outlined in this content. Like, so giving people, that's why the company blogs that are just like, here's what we did last week. Here's what we're doing now. It's like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care what you did last week, and I don't care what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you come up with a super huge feature and you want to let people know in your blog, yeah, sure, of course. No one's going to knock you for that. But when you're talking about yourself all the time, it's like, why are you even blogging? Like, no one's going to read that. Like, no one cares. So, the idea is to give people valuable content that they can actively use. And, you gain mind share, really. I don't mean to use buzzwords, but you really do gain, like, mind share with people. They remember you. And we had this one guy. He just posted an article about this. It took him like 8 months to sign up for Help Scout. He knew about us for 8 months, and he was like, I would keep coming back to the blog. He's like, I love like the trial, blah blah blah. And like finally we caught him like 8 months later, and it's just funny how like content really creates like just a platform to you to help people, and when you're helping people, they will like your business more. I mean, it's reciprocity 101 really with content.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. What kinds of companies do you think should be using a content strategy? Is it just like everyone across the board, or is there kind of a subset of startups and companies that should really be focused on it? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a divide with that. I don't necessarily I'm not necessarily a content like evangelist where I feel like 100% of companies need to do content. Probably just because of a breadth of business experience. I mean, if you're selling like industrial steel, you might not need a content strategy. Yeah. But like the number one really company nowadays, and this is what I do. So, I mean, software startups, you're literally selling the stuff from your website, especially cloud software. They can't buy it anywhere else. They have to buy it from your website. So when you're creating content on your website, I mean, you're giving yourself traffic, you're giving yourself leads, you're giving yourself new customers. I mean, I can't see why any software startup wouldn't implement a smart content strategy. I just can't see a reason why not to.
Yeah, that's great. What are some of the keys to a successful content strategy? Kind of at a high level, what are a few things that just really make for a great content strategy?
So step one, you have to look at your competitors to see what they're doing. For us, that was easy. Like, again, I don't mean to take shots, but the desk.com blog is pretty boring. Like, it's all like anecdotal evidence, 5 tips on loyalty, blah, blah, blah. So we took the opposite route. You kind of look at what your competitors are doing, and you fill the void. It's actually great when you're drowning in competition with both product and content, just running one out there as maybe a blogger or something. Competition's a great thing because now that topic's hot. You know what I mean? One of the greatest expressions I've heard on that is you don't want to be the best asparagus restaurant in town where you're the best asparagus restaurant, but nobody wants an asparagus restaurant. No one cares. It's better to be, a good pizza joint rather than that. But like I said, the first step is you have to look at your competition closely. Where are they like really lacking in that kind of stuff? Is it case studies? Did they never post case? Do they never use data, which was kind of our spin? We like using customer service data, psychology studies in customer loyalty. And that's like no one really does that in terms of like the startup world. So you look at what's absent, then you implement, and you kind of make it better. Another thing is that you need to kind of have, I call this like the M. Night Shyamalan effect, where like you need to have like a twist, where it's like all about this and a nice little twist. Like your main kind of thing that you sell for us would be like customer service, customer loyalty, and a twist. For us, it's data-driven stuff.
No, that's perfect.
And the reason that you should have that is you become very citable in that way. When you're just another, like, I don't know, you're just another marketing blog or you're just another business blog, it's like you get lost in the shuffle. But when you stand out with that kind of unique spin, people will remember you.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. What's the single most popular piece of content that you've ever created, if you know, if you can remember?
That's a tough one. Yeah, that's a tough one. So I've tried a lot of different stuff. So one thing I experimented with, this might be my most popular piece of content. I wrote an article, a really long article on the science of productivity. This was for my own site, Sparring Mind. But what made it popular was I took the research. I went to a YouTube channel and I said, because they publish, it's called ASAP Science. They publish a lot of like short videos on scientific research. And I was like, you can publish this. If you make a video out of this, you can keep the ad revenue. You keep the rights to the video. I was like, just link back to me, right? I was like, oh, that's kind of a creative idea. And I was like, I never knew how it was going to turn out. So they published that video, and at the time, they weren't as popular really at all. They were probably at like 100,000 YouTube subscribers, which on YouTube, you need like a lot more, apparently. You need like a ton to like really make it on YouTube. So after they published it, though, they put out these other two videos that like blew up, like 3 million views apiece, and they're up to like 500,000 subscribers now. But because my video was so close to those other two, it did exceedingly well. My personal video is at like probably 800,000 views,
Wow.
right? In the description, there's a link back to the article. So you can imagine that article, yeah, it did gangbusters, right? Like, it was amazing.
Yeah.
So that's one that I would suspect. The Steve Jobs one did really well for Help Scout. Probably our most viewed article to date. I wouldn't say necessarily the most effective. Sometimes article effectiveness can be like SEO or really how convincing it is to people to sign up. That was definitely our most viewed. And then I wrote a piece in terms of guest posting for Copyblogger, the 5 most persuasive words in the English language. I think that got like 3,200 tweets, so that one was pretty popular too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this is something I'm interested in because you are so deep into the psychology and the content side of things. Are there any other growth strategies for Help Scout that you're involved in? Do you try, pay-per-click? Do you try, partnerships? Or are you personally just singularly focused on psychology and content?
So what I tend to do is I will be upfront on collaborations and stuff like that. Ivana, who is our other marketing person, the empress of spreadsheets, as I call her, she's amazing with the analytics stuff. She handles like the PPC and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So outside of content, I'm more of like I'll do collaborations with other companies. Like I'll do essentially all interviews. I will do all joint projects, joint ventures, kind of things like that. They usually have a content backbone to them. There's usually like a content angle. But I'm more of like the organic stuff, and Ivana handles all of the PPC stuff. She does a really great job at that too.
And you guys are a 2-person team. Is there anybody else in the marketing mix there, or is that it?
Not really. I mean, our design guy, we try to steal him away from product in depth as much as possible. He makes pretty pictures that are great for marketing, but yeah, it's really just us at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, this has been a great interview. I have one last question for you, kind of one to end on here. What's the best advice that you have for anyone that really wants to understand user behavior? They're starting out, they're trying to get their head around this whole, understanding the psychology of their users. Where do they start? What do they do? How do they begin? What's some advice you have for them?
Like I said, books that's where I would start with psychology, and for user behavior in terms of like nonverbal web communication and things like that, case studies and heat maps and all that kind of stuff. That's an absolute must. I mean, I always kind of try to say that, like, when people say, "What do you think of this?" when they're talking about usability, I don't think, I just test, right? I don't think about it. I'm just going to test it. So that's kind of my best insight on really kind of understanding how people use your site is learn a little bit about psychology from books and look at case studies and heat maps very closely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been an awesome interview.
Great. I was happy to be here.